India as a country contributed significantly to the drafting process of the UN Declaration on Human Rights in 1948. Who better than a country that was colonized to understand how important rights were for its citizens? Our constitution is possibly one of the most progressive constitutions, which ensures that rights are fundamental to each one of us as citizens. Given this kind of a canvas, the idea of bringing in business into the realm of human rights is not so difficult conceptually.
The introduction of the human rights terminology goes to the key and the core issues that India will have to grapple with if it wishes to see the benefits of globalization, economic growth, not trickle down to the poor, but empower the poor.
Business and human rights is a framework that puts together the responsibility of businesses towards the communities and human rights. It started with the UN Guiding Principles, which was started in 2011. It puts a three-pillar framework which looks at responsibility of the government to respect human rights, responsibility of the private sector to support and contribute towards human rights, and then looking at access to remedy of people whose rights have been violated.
If you look at the UNGPs and the global value chains or global supply chains, somewhere they have really put responsibility for the first time on the companies. Because earlier the companies could get away by saying that, this is something which my supplier is responsible for. But for the first time, we are talking about companies' responsibility in the entire global supply chains.
I think in terms of the key actions, the Government of India, through the national guidelines for responsible business conduct, has made explicitly clear the 5 or 6 steps that every business, irrespective of their size, the nature of their business, is expected to do. And these range from creating a rights-aware organization, making a statement of commitment towards human rights, developing a human rights due diligence methodology to spot where the problems are and to improve them, and finally to communicate these.
The business and human rights space has rapidly evolved in the last decade. We are seeing the move from soft law to hard law in a number of countries with human rights due diligence requirements. We are seeing corporate responsibility for its ESG impact. We are seeing responsibility go deeper in the supply chain. Corporate benchmarking becoming more and more granular, spurred by investor interest, and also the growing importance of business and human rights in international trade and investment.
The business and human rights agenda is going to ask corporations to move away from a stakeholder perspective to a rights holder perspective. So clearly, marginalized communities, vulnerable communities, tribal communities, landless, these are the people who will be quite significantly impacted, both from an environment perspective as well as from infrastructure and land acquisition perspective.
Some key concerns, with regards to labor conditions and supply chains are, one is limited supply chain visibility, and because supply chains are opaque, it allows businesses to deny the responsibility in either identifying or preventing the negative impacts of their actions. Two, the precarious nature of work in supply chains. Now, precarious nature of work in supply chains does not allow people to lift themselves from poverty. Three, there is increasing informalization in supply chains. Now, increasing informalization also contributes to the precarious nature of work. Workers have no job security. They either have access to minimal or no social security benefits, and they are often trapped in the cycle of debt. Businesses should move towards paying living wages. This is very important because poor wages is a fundamental barrier to achieving decent work and better lives for all.
We do see challenge that women workers are not represented and their voice is hardly even captured by the unions. Are there mechanisms in place that can protect exploitation of these workers? Do we have mechanism in place where gender-based violence at workspaces can be tackled and handled? So somewhere gender is coming out as one of the major challenges that companies have to be aware of. They need to have better policies in place that can take care of women workers at the workspaces.
We all know that climate crisis has become real. Our cities are polluted, our water bodies are polluted. Industries have a huge contribution towards this pollution. Businesses often look at environmental and human impact in different silos, which is definitely not helping. Therefore, it's important that any framework that is being designed looks at environment and the business and human rights component together as one system rather than two systems separately.
Respect for human rights is not just a good to have, but a must have for business. It helps them in their growth, in enhancing their corporate reputation, and in driving long-term sustainability. Additionally, it has a number of advantages and benefits for business. It helps in their legal compliance. It helps anticipate and mitigate risks. It helps them get social license to operate, and it helps them meet their stakeholder requirements and expectations, those of their customers, consumers, of governments, of investors, of communities.
I think one, we should recognize that businesses are not just economic actors. They also should realize their role and their impact in shaping the broader social environment. So businesses should also put in place effective human rights due diligence systems, and this due diligence system should be embedded into all of their core business activities as well as the entire decision-making process. Finally, one of the big problems in supply chains is also the poor access to effective remedy.
So when we talk about access to remedy, there are questions of availability, accessibility and affordability of these systems. And in our experience, what we have been seeing that whenever any violation is being reported or whenever any case is being reported, the communities don't have very simple systems through which they can interact with companies or with regulators or other institutions that are there to safeguard their rights or their entitlements. So that has been a big gap so far.
The National Action Plan reaffirms India's commitment towards realization of human rights and promotion of socially responsible businesses. It provides an overview of India's legal framework, setting out the state's duty to protect human rights and the corporate's responsibility towards human rights.
The next decade of human rights will be even more challenging in terms of meeting legal requirements, meeting reporting requirements, and stakeholder expectations. The bar is continually being raised. The European Union Commission's mandatory human rights proposal will have far-reaching implications due to its extraterritorial operations, liability, directors' duty of care, and oversight over mandatory human rights due diligence.
While the global north is very keen on supply chain in the south to be very transparent, a similar commitment of global north to be transparent about all its trade negotiations, about all the way the decisions are made, is missing. And it can't happen until the south-south cooperation is institutionalized.
Trade has a tremendous impact on environmental impact, it has an economic footprint, it has a social footprint. It is important that this footprint is ethical and reflects responsible business practices. We want to put in place practices that encourage companies to adopt sustainable environmental and labor practices, and that together that result in a race towards the top and not towards the race towards the bottom.
The next generation of young people in the country, I think they really have to be the champions of a rights perspective and counter pressure from the large young population of the country, particularly through their consumption and through the way in which they can shape corporate behavior. I don't think we have seen that happen as much as we would like to. And I do hope that the next decade allows us to do more of that.
It's not economic activity at any price. We want to see fellow Indians, young and old, male or female, different ability or not, be respected for human rights by all businesses. And I think India has a leadership role. When we are such a large economy, our footprint on the world increases. And all of us are familiar with the phrase, "Make in India," and what it stands for. But to invite the whole world to invest and make in India, 3 dots, and add the word responsibly. So make in India, responsibly.